Good morning. My name is Paul Reeder, and I'm helping lead us through our study of Exodus. And this is our third week, so I'm going to lead us through chapters 3 and 4 of Exodus. And to that end, I want to ask you, if you haven't done so recently, or maybe even today, take a minute and read through Exodus. If you want to start in chapter 2, verse 23, and then read through the end of chapter 4. That'll help set a stage for what we're going to talk about today. So if you haven't done that yet, maybe press pause, take a second, and read through that, and then we'll continue in just a second. All right, I'm going to start reading in chapter 2, verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So chapter 2 kind of ends with this kind of zooming out, right, from this story, which involves individual people. And once again, it's God kind of looking down from a 30,000-foot view. But it's something interesting. It's explicit that God is noting things, and then God is hearing, God's remembering, God's seeing, God knows. And it's almost as though it's setting God up to begin doing something different. And the idea is this, God is moving into action, where he has been kind of directing things passively, indirectly working. He's going to begin taking a more directly active role. And that sets us up for the beginning of chapter 3, verse 1, because we're going to zoom right back in to Moses. Chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So where do we find Moses? He is as far from the courts of Egypt as he can be. He's now a shepherd. He's shepherding, notice it doesn't say his own flocks, he's shepherding his father-in-law's flocks. So it doesn't look like Moses has become rich or wealthy or anything special, but he has been entrusted as a shepherd. Many later commentators will note that this is a big deal. God is preparing Moses to lead people both by creating humility in him through giving him a somewhat lowly profession. It's a common thing. Lots of people did it. Shepherding, nothing special about shepherds. Hold on to that. That becomes a biblical theme as we go on. So notice he's leading this flock to the west side of the wilderness, comes to Horeb. Note, it's the mountain of God. He probably doesn't know it's the mountain of God. He's just out leading his flock wherever. Verse 2, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I'll turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. So Moses is just walking along, and suddenly he notices something that would stick out to us as well as to him. He sees a bush on fire, and yet the odd part is not the bush is on fire. The odd part is that the fire doesn't consume the bush. And so he kind of looks, notes, and notice what it says. It says it's the angel of the Lord. So the angel of the Lord is a pretty interesting figure that recurs repeatedly in the Old Testament narrative. It's the idea that there's a God who is up in heaven, and yet that same God, through means, appears to his people, through physical means, through direct, almost physical contact. He appears in, as it were, physical form. And the thing that's interesting to note about this angel of the Lord figure is he is both inseparable from God, like it oftentimes seems like it's actually God himself, and yet he is also he is not the same as God. Like there's this interesting way in which he is both tied to God and yet distinct from God. So that's a tension that's in play that we're going to see developed all the way through the Old Testament, even into the New Testament. Hint, hint, guess where that's going. We can discuss that more. Anyway, let's keep on reading. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So Moses sees this unusual sight that catches his attention, and it's kind of funny the way the narrative is structured. It's almost like God sets up a signpost, like a blinking sign that's meant to catch Moses' attention. We're not super sure of the significance of a burning bush that isn't consumed. God often appears in a flame of fire, so that's not really surprising. But it seems like God's almost dropped a signpost to catch Moses' attention, and he waits until Moses responds, and then he begins to address him. And notice what he says, don't come near, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. So the idea is, because this is God's presence, because this is where God is located, in some sense, in an unusual way physically, Moses is to respond differently. He's not to come near. So that's an interesting thing. Got to think about that. Why does God say, do not come near? Keep your distance. And notice what he says, take off your shoes, take your sandals off. In the ancient Near East, taking off your sandals when you drew near to someone who was of higher rank or who you wanted to show respect to, that was a pretty normal thing. You took off your shoes. It was a way of saying, this is a special place, and you're a special person. So that's not entirely weird, but it's very interesting that he says, do not come near. So hold on to that. And notice what else he says to Moses. I am the God of your father. So connection to Moses' his history, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. This is a repetition that's going to be used over and over again, and it's a way of God saying, I am beyond not only time, but I'm beyond your individual life. I am a God that spans generations. That same God who called Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is still active. I'm still connected to you. That is the God that I am. And notice what it says, Moses hides his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So you get the idea, this is not just something that Moses notices and kind of walks away from, not just a signpost, but something crazy, something that is eye-catching and something that to Moses is terrifying. This is not just a small bush that's on fire, that's not burning up. It is something that when Moses realizes kind of what's going on, he is utterly terrified. But the narrative continues. Verse 7, then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So it's in those two verses, I want you to pause and notice something. Notice all the verbs that are connected to God. And one of the points that's being made here is that all the initiative is on God's side. And notice all that God's doing. He is seeing, he is hearing, he is knowing, he is coming down, he's delivering, he's going to bring them up. It's really interesting to notice. The idea is, yes, God is calling this guy Moses, but the power and the impetus and the really heavy mover and shaker is not Moses. It is this God. So it's interesting to stop and just consider for a second. Is there room in your mind for a God who is free to act and do whatever he wants, when he wants, on his timing? This means that he is not subject to our whims and our thoughts on when things should occur. That's one of the points of this section is God is acting according to his own purposes and to his own will. At the same time, it's in relationship to a specific people. He's not God in general. He is God in specific. And notice what he goes on to say. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, up out of Egypt. So notice what God is saying to him. He's saying, this people that I've been connected to, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he refers to them as my people. There's a unique sense of ownership. This isn't just any random people. There is something specific about this people and their relationship to God. God actually owns them as his own. These people are mine. And notice what he says. Their cries come to me. I've seen their oppression. And it says, come now, I will send you that you may bring my people out of Egypt. So the idea is, Moses, I am commissioning you. I'm calling you. You will be the figure through whom all this works. You are the instrument. But once again, the idea is that God is doing something through Moses. And so once again, as we end this little section, I want to ask you, are you good with a God who is both free, who is active, and who has unique relationships? Not all people are equal. Not everybody is the same way with God. This isn't a God who treats everybody the same. Something to think about it. So we're going to pause that section there, and we'll pick up in just a second. All right, the second section picks up in an unusual way. And after what we've seen of Moses in the last chapter, he's kind of impetuous, he's strong-willed, he has a sense of justice, he's quick to move, he's quick to act, he's ready to go, right? And so you have this expectation set. And so after you hear God kind of call Moses, say, hey, guess what? I am going to move. I am going to rescue my people. And it's funny because that's how Moses refers to the people in the last chapter, right? He goes out to see his people. And so you think there's this convergence of, oh, awesome. These are Moses's people. God is claiming them as his own. Man, this is like a powerhouse movement. This thing's all working together. And so you kind of expect when God says, Moses, you're the man. I'm choosing you. Let's get out there. Let's rescue these people. Let's go. You expect Moses to be like, yeah, dude, let's go. Let's hop on a donkey or a camel. Let's get rocking. And instead, start reading in verse 11. Something quite different and unexpected happens. Instead, Moses responds this way. Verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Like Moses actually starts with pushing back and asks the question, who am I? And it's a weird question because in a sense, once again, the expectation is that Moses would say, well, I'm the perfect person to go talk to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. I grew up there. I know Egyptian culture. I probably speak the language super well. I'm educated in all the ways of Egypt. And I've already tried once to deliver my people. They weren't ready. But now you're ready. I'm ready. Let's go do it. And you almost expect God to say, I've already given you all this preparation. You should be good to go. You're the perfect person to go talk to Pharaoh. And instead, look at what God responds. Because it's not how we expect. God says this, not I've already given you everything, you're already prepped. He says, I will be with you. We got to pause there and think about that. Is that the response you would want if you were Moses? I will be with you. You're going to have my presence. Not giving you anything else. And then he says something else that's kind of funny. And this shall be the sign for you, that I am with you. And you expect, I don't know, what do you expect him to say? This shall be the sign. You expect him to say, you're going to have all these superpowers, these crazy things you're going to have plagues, you're going to have this staff that's going to do all this stuff. But none of that's brought up yet. Notice what he says. This shall be the sign for you that I've sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So what's Moses' sign that the presence of God will be with him? After this is all over and after you have redeemed the people, you will come back to this mountain and you all, it's plural, you shall serve God on this mountain. Now that is just a strange response, right? It's future oriented. Moses probably is looking for a sign right now and God's like, not for right now. The sign will be, I will be present with you and guess what? You will see the end. You will get to the end. You will arrive. You will serve me on this mountain with the people. The sign is, I'm going to follow through and you will be successful. That's the sign. I will be with you. Interesting response. That's objection number one. We got to keep rolling because there's a lot to cover too. Objection number two, starting in verse 13. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So Moses is kind of asking a funny question, like, well, who do I tell them sent me? Like, are they going to know who you are? And it raises a lot of questions, right? Like, have the people forgotten God? Has Moses forgotten God? Is this for Moses' benefit? Is this for the people's benefit? Is everybody unaware? Has everybody forgotten who this God is? Notice his response. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And there's tons of stuff written about what this phrase means, what these words mean. Is this God's name, the I am who is, or I will be who I will be, or I am? In some sense, some commentators say this is almost a refrain on the idea of I will be with you. I'm present. And he said, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. It's a strange response. It's not, it's probably not what Moses is looking for. Moses is looking for God to give him something specific about, well, which kind of God are you? Who do I tell them? And all God says is, I'm present. I'm here. This one, the one who is. So much there for discussion. So much has been written there in the commentaries. We're going to keep on rolling, but let's come back and discuss that Sunday morning. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. So it's interesting in verse 15, that word I am is related to the word that we read in our translations as Lord, and literally is the Hebrew letters Yahweh, 4 letters called the Tetragrammaton. In later times, the Israelite people made a decision that they're not actually going to pronounce those 4 letters out loud as a sign of respect for God. And so they began referring to, essentially, they would just replace it with the word Adonai, which means Lord, as opposed to these 4 letters. But one of the concerns there is that you actually lose the idea that God is giving us, in some sense, a personal name. This name, we might pronounce it Yahweh. And so he says here again, the Lord, and then he connects it to this, the God of your fathers. So there's God once, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. It's really interesting that he wants them to connect it to each of these three people. It's this specific God. This God's name is Yahweh, the Lord, and he has sent me to you. And notice what he says, this is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered through all generations. It's easy to miss in our translations, but this God has a name, and his name is I am, or I am present, I will be, I am what I am. I'm not exactly clear on what that means. We have some ideas, but it's not just he's referred to as the Lord, but this is his name. Interesting point to stop and discuss. We'll come back to it later. So notice what he says. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me. I just want to call attention. He repeats that again and again and again. Might be a point to discuss why. Why the repetition? It's clearly very important. End of verse 16. I have observed you and what's been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. So notice the promise of hope here. He wants Moses to tell them that this isn't just going to end with their redemption from slavery, but it's heading somewhere. They are headed to this land that he promised to Abraham 400 years prior. God is fulfilling his promises. Verse 18, they'll listen to your voice. You and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses is not supposed to go alone. He's supposed to take Aaron, supposed to take the elders. And notice what he's supposed to say to the king of Egypt. God's already met with us, and we need to go respond with a sacrifice. So let us go. 3 days journey into the wilderness. Kind of raises an interesting question. Is all they are after is a 3 days journey? That doesn't seem like it plays out that way. So something interesting to hold on to. Verse 19. This sounds great, right? We're going to take them. I'm going to tell them this is what's going to happen. But I know," this is God speaking, "the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand." So the idea is resistance is coming. This king of Egypt, this Pharaoh, he is not just going to hear a couple words, a couple signs, and then send you on your way. Instead, there's going to be a lot of pushback. It's almost like God saying, gear up for battle. A mighty hand will have to come down, something with power. Verse 20, "So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians." There's a ton to discuss here. We're just going to run through it, and then we're going to jump to the next section. The idea is that God is going to move. God's hand is going to move. It's going to be powerful. Egypt's going to be forced to let them go. And then something crazy is going to happen, right? It's the Israelites, as they leave, as they are shoved out, they're going to go from being slaves in some ways to conquerors because they're going to plunder. But notice who is doing the conquer. It's not these warring, powerful men. It's the people who actually you don't find in battle. It's the women. And the idea is Egypt is going to be so taken down, so, I don't know, lowered on the notch that your women are just going to ask them for jewelry. They're going to hand it over and send you on your way. It's going to be the ultimate reversal. Egypt's going to be turned over. Israel's going to be elevated, and you will plunder them. We're going to take a short break there, and we're going to jump into chapter 4, see some more objections, and then we'll finish up. All right, chapter 4 starts. Then Moses answers. This is another objection. "Behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" So Moses is basically saying, I have no credibility. They're going to see me and say, "Who are you? Who are you? God didn't appear to you." They won't believe me. And notice how God responds here. The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A staff." So Moses is carrying around a shepherd's staff, pretty standard tool for shepherds, used to kind of grab sheep, used to fight off wolves. Not anything of power, not anything super crazy, just a shepherd's staff. It's a lowly instrument, nothing special about it. And he said, "Throw it on the ground." So Moses tosses the staff on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. It's kind of funny to me, especially if Moses is the one relaying all this information, that there's so much here to make Moses look bad. Like Moses sees God and he's terrified. God sends Moses to do this, and all that he does is essentially object. And now God tells this staff to turn into a snake, and Moses doesn't just kind of say, "Oh, that's cool." He takes off running. The idea here, once again, the focus is not on Moses being this great, amazing, powerful person, but it's actually quite the opposite. One of the things that's hugely being highlighted is Moses's weaknesses. Hold on to that. That's going to become central. But the Lord said to Moses, "Put out your hand and catch it by the tail." So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. In Egyptian mythology, the serpent is a god, and to some extent, Pharaoh would wear a kind of hood that looked like a cobra's hood as a way of representing himself as a serpent deity. And so it is potentially pretty symbolic that Moses grabs the serpent by the tail, which is, if you know anything about snakes, I don't know a ton, but you don't want to grab a snake by its tail. You want to grab it by the neck, right behind the head, because you don't want to get bit. And in a sense, Moses is doing the exact opposite thing that you should want to do. You shouldn't grab it by a tail, but Moses grabs it by the tail, and it turns back into a staff. And many commentators say this is, to some extent, this is looking at Pharaoh's power and saying, you're going to grab Pharaoh by the tail, and he's not going to be able to do anything to you. So there's a lot going on there. Verse 5, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Notice the repetition there. Verse 6, again the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out again, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back inside your cloak." So he put his hand back inside his cloak and took it out, and behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. So the second sign, essentially leprosy, we don't think here is the same kind where your body essentially deteriorates, the nerves die, and then pieces of you can get hurt and fall off. We think it's actually something else. We think it's probably just a skin disease, and it's a way of showing the skin turns white, and then the skin turns normal and healthy again. It's a way of saying, I am a God who has power over plagues, over healings. This is all within my power. So last sign for the people, if they will not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. So this is really pretty fascinating, right? It's taking water from the Nile. The Nile is the heart of Egypt. It's the lifeblood. It's where all the fertility of the ground comes from. It's in many ways, it is the thing where all the gods spawn from. It is the lifeblood of Egypt. And what Moses is going to do is take some of the water from the Nile, which should be pro-Egyptian, right? The Nile should be totally in the Egyptians' favor, and yet he's going to take it, he's going to turn it into blood, right? He is going to have the power. God has the power of life and death over even the Nile. So there's a ton of symbolism going on here. There's a ton of power in ways that we may just, it's easy to miss is what I'm trying to say. So note that. God has power even over dry ground. So now he's got things, hey, if the people say, who are you? You can show them these three signs. That's pretty powerful. Verse 10, another objection. But Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I'm not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I'm slow of speech and tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth?" So notice Moses saying, hey, I can't even talk. I've been out in the wilderness for years. Even before I couldn't talk. Now I really can't talk. I can't talk. That's why I'm not qualified. And notice how God responds. "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." So as we get to the end of these four objections, notice God is gracious and patient and responds with each one. With each response, notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, "Moses, you're totally wrong, you're way off base." He actually, in some sense, with each response, legitimizes Moses's protest. He almost plays along and says, okay, good point. And notice even in this section, I will be with your mouth. Each of them in some ways is a way of saying the answer to your objections is I will be with you, right? And then we go on. Verse 13, and this is where I think it gets absolutely hilarious. But he says, this is Moses talking, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." Like you can almost hear Moses' frustration building, like, I tried this was a good point, this was a good point, shoot, I'm out of good points. Okay, God, just send someone else, anyone else, just not me. I don't want to do it. We got to pause here and just think how different this is from the Moses who in the last chapter sees his people, sees their struggles, feels the injustice, sees a specific act where this guy's beating one of his fellow men, walks out, kills him, feels justified. I've done what is right. God is delivering me. According to Stephen in Acts 7, it seems like God's delivering you people through me, and the people reject him. Moses is astounded, kind of runs away. And now we have Moses at every possible turn saying, no, don't send me. Send anybody else. And you kind of expect, is there some frustration on God's part at this point? And maybe you think, oh no, God never gets angry. No, verse 14, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. He's frustrated with Moses. So it's something to think about. God has amazingly long patience, but there are limits to which God says, nope, that's far enough. I'm angry with you now. This is no longer, there's no longer a reason here. There's no longer a point to push back on. You just don't want to go. But notice, he's angry, and yet, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he's coming out to meet you, and he sees you. He'll be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs. So notice, God is angry, and yet God doesn't smite. God doesn't strike him down and be like, I'm done with you. There's a sense in which God says, hey, I understand. The answer is no. You will do this. I am placing a call on your life. Let's get up. Let's get going. I'm making, as it were, I'm taking into account your weaknesses, but we are still marching forward. So that's the end of Moses' objections. We're going to pause there and come back one last time to finish out the section and ask some questions. All right, this is our fourth and last section on Exodus 3 and 4. I'm going to start reading in verse 18. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." That is kind of an interesting response. You expect him to tell Jethro more, and yet he doesn't. And we have to kind of ask, why? Is Moses trying to hide something? Does Moses think this is a good idea, bad idea? Does he think Jethro's going to say no? We really don't know, but Jethro just kind of says, "Shalom, go in peace." Verse 19, and the Lord said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey, and they went back to the land of Egypt, and Moses took the staff of God in his hand. So we ended the last section with the staff, and this section with the staff. God's telling Moses, hey, don't be afraid. Everybody who is gonna kill you is gone. It's almost like a fresh start. Verse 21. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles I put in your power. But I, get this is key, will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. So he's preparing Moses, saying, we're going to draw this out. This isn't just going to be like a flip a switch, you show up, quick and easy, done deal. God is telling him that, no, I have a deeper purpose. There's more going on here than just rescuing the people. There is this demonstration of glory. You're going to see something crazy. You're going to see wonders. Make sure you do all the miracles that I've put in your power. And notice what he says, but I will harden his heart. This is going to be a good topic for discussion. Who hardens Pharaoh's heart? As we move on later in this chapter, we're going to find out it's not only God, but Pharaoh's going to harden his own heart. And we're going to see God hardens his heart. So really brings up a lot of good debate, a lot of discussion. The idea there of hardened heart is, it's not so much how do you feel, but it's a stubbornness and a resolve. And essentially God is saying, I'm going to build up Pharaoh's resolve. And instead of just saying, sure, get lost, he is going to press against me. And the idea is God and Pharaoh are going head to head. And it's not going to be a pushover battle, but Pharaoh is going to push back. So be prepared. Verse 22. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, meaning once you see that he has hardened his heart, once you see that he will not let the people go, you're to say this. This is a key thing. Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. And I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. So this is kind of a defining phrase for Israel, both in the moment, but for many years to come. The idea that the Israelite people, the children of Abraham, the children of Jacob, are God's firstborn son. Not as it were only son, but firstborn son. We would all say, who is God's firstborn son? Clearly, Jesus, right? And so you need to tie some of this theology in and understand what is the New Testament saying about Jesus, if it's saying something similar, related, or the same. But it's also putting Israel on a kind of a pedestal here. This is not just a battle over, hey, I want to rescue this people from slavery, this just generic against oppression narrative, but this is very specific. Israel is God's firstborn son. This is a chosen people. And notice the call of the son is not just to be a glorified, as it were, son, just to sit on a throne, but it's that he may serve me. Identity, as God's people, we are to serve. Verse 23, notice the end. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. Interesting entrance of retributive justice. God is literally saying, if you don't let my son go, then I'm coming after your son. The stakes are being raised. God is placing Israel, his value for them, his love for them, his unique relationship with them on a pedestal. And he's saying, Pharaoh, if you will not let them go, then I will challenge your relationship to your son. It's a potential power move. You've got to see that. Verse 24, we're going to hit some weird stuff. At a lodging place along the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him, that's Moses, to death. What? As they're traveling to Egypt, God meets Moses and seeks to kill him. That's got to catch your attention. How crazy is that? Then Zipporah, that's Moses' wife, takes a flint knife, and she cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." So he, that's God, let him, that's Moses, alone. It was then that she said, "A bridegroom of blood," because of circumcision. So this is a crazy story, right? Moses is on his way back, and for some reason, God meets him, and it's like he is attempting to kill him. Like it's like they're doing battle. God is moving on him so that Moses not just might get hurt, might notice that God's there, but is going to die. Moses has done something that is so offensive to God, God is ready to put him to death. And notice what it seems to be. It seems to be that Moses has not circumcised his own son. And for some reason, it's like he's not moving to do it. And his wife jumps in, Zipporah, and circumcises the son. And God essentially lets him go. So we have to kind of pause and just take a minute. And I'm not going to get into the details of circumcision, but the idea is that that is the covenant sign of God's people. It was their way of saying, I'm set apart. It was Abraham's way of saying, I am God's and God's alone. It's a sign of the covenant. We just pause and ask, are we willing, when God calls us, to enter into God's definition of what that calling might be, to God's definition of what it means to be his people? Or do we define our relationship with God by what we are willing to do, by the symbols that we are willing to take on? Who defines our relationship with God? Interesting question, but in this case, it is deadly serious. And so we kind of need to pause and think about that one. Let's finish the chapter. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." And he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord which he sent him to speak, and all the signs he commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel, and Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. So Aaron shows up. They go together to Egypt. They meet with the elders. They meet with the people. It seems like the people actually, interesting enough, don't believe, because Aaron ends up doing the signs in front of them. And verse 31, what's the conclusion? And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, so they're convinced this God is real, this God's heard, this God's doing something, they bowed their heads and worshiped. Response to having hope in God, to being sure that God is going to move on your behalf, it is worship. On that note, I want to ask a couple questions, and then we will be finished with this section. First off, I want to ask you to think about this point for discussion for Sunday. What is our calling as followers of Jesus? Calling is a very popular word in the New Testament. It always refers to when God leads a people or a person to begin following Jesus. It's something, in a sense, that he is initiating, but it's placing a sort of, I want to use the term, vocation on us. It's laying out our life's purpose. It's telling us what we are to be about. So as we think about that, I want to ask you, what does it mean to have a calling as a follower of Jesus Christ? What is your or our communal calling? Second, this point's related to that. As we enter into our calling, it's very interesting that God essentially doesn't use any of Moses' strengths. Instead, he allows Moses to point out all of Moses' weaknesses, and then instead of shoring up, as it were, those weaknesses, he instead calls Moses to see that his presence is what will set all those things right. His presence, him being close, is what will allow Moses to carry out his calling. Question for you, as you think about your calling or our calling as followers of Jesus, or our calling as a church, are we more dependent on our strengths in and of ourselves, or are we more dependent and more confident of God's presence with us? Is it required that God supernaturally act in and around us for us to carry out our calling? Third question, What objections do you have to God and what he is doing? Because I want to point out, and this is a really cool thing, God is happy and even welcoming of objections. He goes through 4 with Moses. All of Moses' reasons God talks about, he's willing to dialogue on. We need to encourage ourselves and others that God loves to talk about objections. He doesn't ignore people. He doesn't smite them when they object. Notice how he responds to Thomas. Jesus doesn't say, Thomas, you're an idiot, get away from me. Instead, he actually welcomes Thomas, says, hey, Thomas, put your fingers here. Put your hand in my side. God and Jesus, who is God on earth, God embodied, God incarnate, welcome objectives. So question for you, what objections do you have? Can you articulate them? And how will you bring those to God? Let's see, last couple things. Shorter questions. One, how is God exposing and revealing your weaknesses? It's a question for right here and right now. Be a great discussion question for Sunday. And then along those lines, as God is revealing your weaknesses, how is he calling you to find hope in his presence with you? All right, we're going to end there. I look forward to seeing you guys Sunday. Looking forward to jumping in. I'll see you at 9 a.m. this Sunday morning. We'll have a Zoom call. If you have any questions in the meantime, gpaulreeder@gmail.com. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.